to Bob. Mr. Breeze is the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Energy. He provides leadership, establishes policy, and maintains oversight of DOE's annual $2 billion investment in information technology at more than 25 natural laboratories and production facilities to enable urgent missions in energy, science, and nuclear security that span from open science to national security. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bob.
So Parham asked if I'd do dinner. I wondered where we were going, and then he said, no, I meant be the dinner speaker. So I tried to arrange a small vehicle accident in Breezewood to detain at least Rocky, because I figured that if he was in the audience, I didn't have a chance. And then Parham tosses out this Vanguard Award, and following a luminary like John Teeter, I feel a little out of place. So what I did in order to compensate for that is I did pre-place some folks. I do have the Department of Energy Chief Architect Rick Lauderdale, our Chief Technology Officer Pete Saronis, our Chief Privacy Officer Jerry Hanley, one of our bureaus, the National Nuclear Security Administration, their Chief Technology Officer Travis Howerton, and I believe Anil Carmel from Los Alamos National Laboratory. Our contractor Chief Technology Officer is here too. So I've pre-placed those folks here to, clap or laugh or whatever. So what Parham asked me to talk about briefly, the state of federal cybersecurity, I've listed 6 things, and if you don't want to talk about them, we'll talk about something else. But what I have here, just half a dozen things here: the state of federal cybersecurity, which will be brief; the future of cyber policy, which will affect all of us; a little bit about the technology push and the challenges that brings upon us, and if you, I think the sessions that we have scheduled here and kind of the talk that Travis will give you a feel for that. What it's like working with Congress, and as well as what it's like working with industry, and then some of the operational response things we have. And then Parham asked if I would touch on administration transition, and I don't know how much of that I'll do, but I'm happy to do that. And I guess the other thing I do want to mention, not only John but Dennis. I mean, you talk about 2 luminaries. I mean, we are all blessed to be in the presence of folks like Dennis and John and be partners with them. And I think both of them deserve one more round of applause for their contribution to our country. So where are we with federal cybersecurity? I mean, I think that if you had to vote up, neutral or down, I'd give federal cybersecurity a thumbs up. We've got a lot of challenges, but overall, I think we're doing pretty good. I think we're actually doing better than the majority of the private sector, the majority of our critical infrastructure providers, and really even better than some of the folks that you might say are the big boys who aren't necessarily represented here, in our top-tier defense contractors. They've got some incredible capabilities, but given the complexity of the federal government and the fact that we span everything from the .edu world, which we do in some of our energy labs, all the way into the intelligence community, I think we're doing pretty darn good when you look at what you read about in the press every day and every week and every month. Now that said, the maturity of our abilities varies greatly across the government. And I think we really do need a better way to assess our performance. And it's different than getting that stoplight chart that we get from our interviews. I just had my interview with DHS, the annual CIO CISO interview about how you doing on all your FSMA requirements. And I think we still need something better than that. Within the Department of Energy, our electric sector partners, the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, have actually developed a cybersecurity maturity model that they've worked collaboratively with some of our large utility partners to look across about 10 different domains in the way that they manage cybersecurity. And so we've built 3 different levels of maturity, and there's a lot of opportunity there. I've got a meeting coming up with some of the SAGEs, the senior advisors to government executives, Karen Evans and Mark Foreman and some of these others that we know about, that have been tasked by OMB to say, hey, is there another way that we can start looking at cyber maturity and how well the government's doing? And so we're going to brief them on what we're doing in the electric sector. But I do think that there are a lot of maturity models that have been built, whether it's software, whether it's business processes, a lot of the other ISO standards, and there is a way to do this on somewhat of a not so technical basis of have you implemented all 772,000 controls in the 800-53, as well as, I don't know, there's like 300 new ones coming out on mobility. I think we're scheduled to have those complete on Wednesday of next week, but only for Android, not iOS, because I've told Rick, my chief architect, who is an Apple lover, that I've already shorted all my Apple stock, and I keep losing money every friggin' week. So, but we'll keep working on that. Along with the state of federal cybersecurity, we're still stuck in this prevent and recover mode. You know, we build higher and thicker fences, and we say defense in depth, which means we just buy more higher and thicker fences. And we think this is going to make us better, and then when we get attacked, we go, well, that's a bummer, so we go off and we go, you know, we go figure out how to fix it, and hopefully nobody gets hung for that and nobody loses their job. But there is a thing that the whole of the U.S. government has got to look at this more than just us as IT and cybersecurity professionals. I mean, Fluffy the Destroyer of Worlds is not going to resolve this for us, Rocky. We need more. And that has to do with what we would call in our three-phase approach of prevent, recover, respond, is the response phase really has to start imposing risk and consequence on the adversary. And that's something that requires not only our diplomatic efforts out of state, it requires the capabilities out of the Department of Defense, and it requires each and every one of us to actually do things that make it more difficult and more consequential on the adversary that comes after us. And I'm not going to, you know, try to propose certain things, or I'm not going to say, hey, you ought to go off and start executing your own attacks against people. Okay, there are a few legal issues with that, but we as a country are beginning to have that conversation at the highest levels of government, and it's critically important that if we're going to do this and we're going to survive it, and for those of us that are in the IT cyber world, we talk about the cyber war that we're in, but yet it's undeclared. Okay, which means we've got to work within the legal and diplomatic boundaries that we have today, but we've got to find a way to impose risk and consequence on the adversary, whether it's anonymous or LulzSec or some nation state. So that's really where we are, I think we are on the state of federal cybersecurity. I think we're good, I think we're getting better, and I think there are a lot of things going on in the individual agencies and across the government that are going to make us even better. With respect to the future of cyber policy, in my discussions with Mark Weatherford, the Deputy Undersecretary for National Protection Programs, and my boss who bailed on me about 9 weeks ago, Mike Lokaitis, who went to go be the Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity and Communications over at Homeland Security, I think you're going to continue to see as they bring that team together with John Stroyford and others, is that the push on continuous monitoring is going to continue to go up exponentially. And the continuous monitoring thing has to be more than how fast are you patching known vulnerabilities in your system. It has to be how good are you at recognizing challenges, addressing the risks associated with those challenges. Some of it's patching, some of it's acceptance, some of it may be transfer if you can figure out how to do that. But how do you respond to those things, and how do you create an environment where your people and your systems are constantly learning to be more secure than they were the day before? It also is incumbent upon all of us to help create the human capital that's necessary to drive us into the future. I mean, we got a lot of smart people in here, but most of the things, I mean, I was the last freshman class at Vanderbilt that had to do a project on punch cards. Okay? I don't know if I should be proud of that or embarrassed. John, you probably did more than your freshman project on punch cards. Sorry. You said you were old. But the workforce of the future requires a lot of different skills, and the skills that we're sending kids to school today on are for jobs that haven't even been created yet. And so if you look at the National Initiative for Cyber Education, and probably everybody's heard about it, and probably everybody at least skimmed the first page of the paper when it first came out, but there's a significant amount of work that's gone into that framework that can really help us drive the requirements that we need in our people. And the other piece of that is really how do we take the best and the brightest out of our colleges and universities today and make them the cyber warriors of the future. If you know, in my conversations with Alan Paller and some of the others, if you look at the 4 quadrants, I'm kind of stuck in that quadrant that's called the policymakers, the least technically capable and probably the most likely to screw something up on a day-to-day basis. And then you've got the average guys and gals that are running your networks, okay? And then you've got the academic research folks, and not to demean anybody who's an academic researcher, but a lot of them write gorgeous papers but have never actually had to do any of it before. But in that upper right-hand quadrant are the people we actually have the fewest of, and the ones we need the most of are the people with exceptional skill, exceptional innovative capabilities, and the willingness to go jump in and really solve the incredibly hard problems of the future. And one of the things that we've looked at and we've conceptualized is the idea of creating cyber interns and a cyber residency the same way we do in the medical industry. In the medical industry, you graduate and you have this wonderful MD, and it's about useless unless you want to go to the most remote county in the country and claim that, hey, I'm a doctor. But for the most part, you're in a 2 to 4 year residency, and if you're in a specialty field, it may be 5 to 7 to 10 years before you really can go practice your trade. How do we find those MDs of cybersecurity and put them with the best and the brightest minds that we have that are doing it each and every day, and give them the operational experience they need in a 2 to 3 year period where they can become the cyber leaders of tomorrow? And I think that's critically important. I think the NICE framework is a good start to that, but we need to do more with that. With respect to risk management and cyber policy, I think everybody's on board. The old FISMA and wherever we might end up with new FISMA is everybody realizes it's all about risk management. If you apply every control, you won't be necessarily secure unless you have knowledge about why you're applying those controls and where you're applying them. The difficulty is that the people who have to actually accept the risk aren't necessarily the CIO and the CISO. It's the people that actually rely on those business systems and those solutions to get their job done each and every day. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit at the very end when we talk about operational response and some of the challenges we came across in the most recent Eagle Horizon continuity of operations, continuity of government exercise. So risk management is really hard. The administration's policy, this administration is going to continue to drive to push operational oversight responsibility to the Department of Homeland Security. And that's where the interagency policy committees are really trying to push this. Now, that's not to say that we don't need the Department of Defense, because the capabilities that they have and that they've developed and that they deploy in defense of the homeland are important. But I think it's also important, and the agreement in the interagency community is that the role of defense is too important for them to be distracted with day-to-day security of the United States. Once again, going back to my comment about the undeclared war of cybersecurity, if we ever end up in where we believe we are truly under a directed cyber attack, then that relationship is going to change in accordance with the same way we would if we were under physical attack. But the administration is going to continue to push that Homeland Security has that responsibility for protecting us on a day-to-day basis, DOD for defense of the homeland, projection of power, and then that's going to come back to us if we're ever under direct attack. If you haven't taken the time to read it, and I won't say it's a short read, but the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, if you as an agency or you as a supporter of an agency aren't familiar with that, then you need to become familiar with it. And again, I'll touch on that at the end. And the last piece on cyber policy is probably one of the most difficult and is even more difficult than implementing controls. And that is on the security risk in our cyber supply chain. Literally nothing that we deploy in our core telecom infrastructure at the internet service provider level, at your agency level, or out in your deployed units is designed, engineered, manufactured, and maintained here in the United States. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the people that built your technology have evil intent, but it means that you don't have a complete understanding of how that thing is truly built and whether it does or does not align with the requirements and the design expectations that you put into it. We've got to improve on our ability to determine in critical implementations whether or not that circuit, that component, that appliance, or that system can truly be trusted to provide our primary mission essential functions in time of need. It's incredibly difficult. We're working with the internet service providers. We're working with the Defense Production Act Committee and others. But if you have not thought about your supply chain security, I'd encourage you that as part of your overall risk management process that you begin to do that. I won't argue that it's easy. The third point is really on the tech push, and you're going to hear a lot more about that this week, and you hear about it each and every day. Whether it's cloud, mobile, whether it's iPhone or Android apps, whether it's wireless, whether it's desktop video teleconferencing, which was a recent challenge we just, I think we got over the hump on. All of these innovations are really pushing the cyber and the privacy and the records management challenges that we have. If we were to follow all the policies and rules that are in place today, that were put in place decades ago for the systems that existed back then, we wouldn't be using any of this technology. I mean, I get in discussions, I won't say arguments, discussions almost every week with my general counsel, whether it's about visual voicemail, whether it's about instant messaging, whether text voicemails, is that different than the voicemail that's on my phone? How do we handle that? What are the privacy issues? What's the challenge with putting cameras in our workspaces? All of those things require an interagency approach to at least learn the best practices. We may not have an interagency policy on it, but we've got to at least learn from each other on those. So I talked about interagency cooperation. Working with Congress. All right, so that's a big challenge. And it's not just on cyber and IT policy that it's a challenge. When this administration came in, we had a study of cybersecurity for the 44th presidency that was put together that actually has some pretty good thought pieces in it. Regardless of your political persuasion, I think few of us would argue that there are good things to go work on in that document. While we've made progress, there's still a lot of work to be done. And after 2 years of the administration, as Congress began to try to put together various bills on improving cybersecurity for the government, they finally came to the administration and said, hey, you know, we've got like 50 of these things, and they all overlap. Some are connected, some are disconnected, and it would really be beneficial if the executive branch would come to us with an integrated package. Now, I won't say it's comprehensive because there are gaps in it, but at least it covers some key elements about protecting the American citizens, protecting our critical infrastructure, protecting government networks, and protecting our civil liberties. But the administration delivered that to the Hill in May of last year. And we've been briefing it to them, we've been explaining it to them, and we've been out on the road with this thing for over a year, and we've made no progress. Okay, whether you're Lieberman, Collins, McCain, Ruppersberger, or any of those folks, we haven't made progress. The Congress is still so divided over this issue that I really don't see that we're going to have any success in getting cyber legislation passed during this session. So that really dumps the load back on us, the federal agencies, and us in cooperation with Homeland Security and Defense to do what we can. If you look at things in tiers, those things that are in statute and law, those things that are in policy, whether it be at the government level or the agency level, and those things that are within implementation space, is we often look to law and to statute and say, if we could only get a law that would enable us to do this, or that would tell us to do this, is that's actually the most difficult way to get anything done in D.C. I mean, if we really look at it, there's a lot of latitude in implementation, a lot. And if you and your attorneys aren't looking at what you can do inside your agency and with your key agency and industry partners, you know, for us it's the energy critical infrastructure, then you're probably spending too much of your time focusing on statute, not enough focusing on what's within your control today. The debates really center on a handful of things. One is the debate between DOD and DHS, and I've kind of already covered where the administration is on that. The other is on, should we rely on public-private partnership, or should we rely on regulation? And once again, there has to be some type of balance. You don't want to over-regulate to the point where the industry that we all rely on, because that's where so much of the expertise is, says, okay, fine, you know, we're not going to do anything because you guys might fine us for trying to do the right thing. So we got to find that balance as well. And the other is with critical infrastructure protection. If we go look at what it takes to run the government in the wake of a catastrophe, whether it be something like a Katrina, whether it be a major blackout that could take out not only just the Northeast or down in the San Diego area, but could potentially take out the Northeast corridor all the way down to Florida or something, those things have a lot of potential negative impact. And there are places where we need to direct critical infrastructure owners and operators, 90% of which is in the hands of private industry, that they have to meet certain standards. And some of the administration's legislative proposals address that, similar to the way that we do security and exchange certifications today. Along with that comes information sharing. You've seen if you followed the Defense Industrial Base pilot and the way that we're leveraging government-furnished information to provide protection for some of the largest suppliers for the Department of Defense, those are things that we need to look at and see how do we deploy those more broadly. We need to find ways to share that information in a way where Internet service providers and companies are not acting as agents of the government, but are leveraging the technology, the capabilities, and the knowledge of the federal government in the private sector for their benefit. And so with that comes the role of the Internet service providers. And we need to really make a decision as a country about whether that role is going to be active or passive. If you look today at what the Internet service providers are capable of doing and permitted to do, is they can pretty much take any action to protect their own networks. But they can't take any action that limits, inhibits, or changes the flow of the communications that they manage. Yet today we manage mail, interstate shipping, international shipping, ports of entry, and all kinds of other things in this country, yet each and every day we fail to manage to the same level of risk management what happens on the Internet. So today we willfully deliver essentially bombs, they're called malware, to grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles across the country today, knowingly, because the laws in the country today and what we have for information sharing and the use of government information prevents us from keeping us from delivering that to somebody's front door. And I think, and a lot of people think, that that needs to change. So working with industry is something we absolutely, positively have to do, and it's important that for our previous speaker who came from Texas, and said he spoke fast, but we would get some howdies and things in there. But it's important that all y'all are here. But it is a difficult balance because we want to partner with the industry, but our motives are different. We have a motive to protect government information, protect the country's operations, and you have this motive called money. Okay? We just like to spend it. So, although these days we do want to save it as well. So, you know, yoo-hoo for the campaign to cut waste. You know, I'm giving up my budget. So, but we do need to figure out what that right balance is. We do need a better way to evaluate products and services. And while FedRAMP is a critically important step forward as we move to cloud computing, is that I don't know, my opinion, whether it's sustainable and scalable when you start looking beyond basic infrastructure as a service. And when you start looking at the multitude of security solutions, software solutions, business solutions specifically, and other things, and then you get into the supply chain piece of this, and you look at quality software engineering, quality control overall. I just don't know that something like the Joint Accreditation Board and third-party assessments are scalable. And so I think there's still room for all of us to work together to figure out a scalable model for government and industry partnership that protects the nation's interests while protecting your right to innovate and make a profit. The penultimate thing that I'll cover here is operational response. Last week we had the Eagle Horizon exercise, which is the national continuity of operations, continuity of government exercise. And for the first time, we built this on a series of exercises. This was phase 4 of what started off 2 months ago as information sharing, to a national tabletop exercise, which involved all of government, industry, and our international partners, to a functional exercise about 3 weeks ago, to the continuity of operations and government exercise. And it drew down through this entire thing a scenario of a cyber attack leading to physical consequences through the attack on critical infrastructure. And it's pretty scary. It's pretty easy in retrospect to say, oh, it's Katrina, it's Rita, it's a blackout, it'll be over in a few days. We can see the hurricane coming. There's a cone of uncertainty. Move supplies and resources down there. And even with FEMA's previous authorities in the post-Katrina Act, there's a lot of autonomy and authority to get resources where you need them. So now imagine the scenario where there's a cyber attack on critical infrastructure in Massachusetts, and the governor asked for a Stafford Act declaration to get federal assistance because he's overwhelmed. And then now there's Florida who says, by the way, I'm under attack too, and I need some help. And then Tennessee says, I might be under attack. I need some cyber assistance to make sure I'm not under attack. And by the time the exercise generates, you have 23 states saying we need the federal government's help. Where do you send it? We just don't have that level of resource to just ship out to 50 states plus our territories plus our international partners. And while we can address the physical impacts, we can't necessarily address the cyber impacts. And so expect that the NCIC, the National Cyber and Communications Integration Center, is going to take on a larger role as we move forward. U.S. CERT will still serve as our focal point for reporting and the delivery of early warnings and indicator notices and those types of information pieces, but expect to see the NCIC take on a much larger role in the coordination of the federal response, and expect your agencies or the agencies you support to be expected to know to much greater level of detail what resources they have to bring to the national problem. And so within the Department of Energy, we say, oh, wow, that seems pretty easy. We've got all these national laboratories, 8 of which are very involved in cybersecurity. But, oh, by the way, we have this mission called nuclear weapons safety and security, and maybe we really don't want our cyber guys running off to go solve your mass transit problem in Massachusetts. We'd really like them to stay here and make sure the most sensitive secrets that the nation owns remain protected. But likewise, all of your agencies have capabilities that can be brought to bear. The other piece is when you look at your primary mission essential functions, I will bet, because we had this challenge, is that while you know what missions are essential, you may not know which systems are essential to delivering those missions. And then when you dive in deeper, in this case in the exercise, which involved a component that had been manufactured with a planned vulnerability, DHS's Industrial Control System CERT. Yet until recently, Homeland Security had never formally identified to the Department of Energy that our support of ICS CERT was critical to their mission. Now, we kind of knew that, but when it came down to this exercise, it's like there's nothing in our existing continuity of operations processes that say, make sure you don't redirect resources from Idaho National Lab to something else because you've just compromised the nation's ability in industrial control system security. So you got to know your relationships with your other agencies, and you got to know your authorities. Department of Commerce in the Defense Production Act owns most of the delegated presidential authorities, but some of those have been further delegated out to Energy, Homeland Security, Defense, and others. For us, the Federal Power Act also gives us some authorities. And there are things that you may not have thought about in cyberspace that if you go back and talk with your attorneys, and I know that I'm the one, where's Parham? I made the comment about I go to these cyber meetings and they're all attorneys except for me. And, you know, if I had the gumption to go back to school, I'd go back and get a JD. But you got to go talk with your general counsels and your attorneys and understand the titles and the acts and the other authorities that have been delegated to your agency that you may be able to leverage for cybersecurity or that you'll be expected to leverage for cybersecurity in the event of a national emergency. So the last piece is administration transition. For those of you that have been through more than one of these, it'll just be another transition. Whether the White House changes hands or not, there will be a transition team that comes into your agency that will set up shop, and there will be some changes that will be expected to occur. And you just have to be prepared for that. The good news in all of this is regardless of whether the White House changes hands or not, I don't see anything, regardless of how divided Congress is, that is going to change this country's focus on the importance of cybersecurity. And so for those of us in the IT cyber business, I think that's good news, okay? Because unlike things like energy policy or labor or healthcare and those things that may wander depending on who, you know, which party's in power, both parties agree that this is critically important to our future national security and economic security and for our future prosperity. The differences, while they seem great, and I kind of amplified that earlier in working with Congress, they seem great, they're actually in implementation. Okay, there's no divide about the importance. The divide is all about implementation. And we'll continue to work through those regardless of who owns the House or the Senate or the White House. Those problems will continue to be there, and we'll drive through those. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to kind of set the stage for. I know that, in SecureGov in December, you'll get a much deeper dive into all of this. But by the time we come around again in December, we will have had an election. We will probably have seen some changes in the future for IT and cybersecurity. But I think the key points are still the same. We're doing pretty good. We got a lot of room to grow, but we're doing pretty good. Policy is going to continue to drive us to get better expertise and to have better knowledge and understanding of how we manage risk in our systems. The technology is not going to stop raining on us, okay? So get over it. The next iPhone will be here next month, and I don't mean the iPhone 5. That won't be till October. So, but there will be something. There will be some silly Windows tablet that will show up on the screen, okay? So you're going to have to deal with it, and that's going to require working with your physical security folks, with your attorneys, and everybody. Working with Congress will always be a challenge, but we all believe in the importance of this. The industry relationships, we have to continue to foster those. And whether it's industry to agency, industry to intergovernmental, or on a broader scale in events like this, we got to continue working together. It's too important and it's too hard to do alone. And then the operational response, because in the end, even though we want to protect, recover, and respond, that recover piece and the prevent piece are the technical things that we, as IT and cyber professionals, really are in a position to affect. The response piece, that's more of a White House policy, State Department, those types of things, but we still have a lot of work to do on prevent and recover. And then the last thing is transition will happen. Okay, as we all know, change is the only constant. Whether it's technology or whether it's policy, we'll keep plugging ahead. So with that, I know it already gets late, and you know, they've stopped pouring wine in here, but they probably are still pouring beer and wine downstairs. So with that, if you have questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll just turn you back over to Parham before Rocky eats my dessert. Gone.
All right, and that brings our, thanks again, Bob. That brings our this evening's session to a close. Just a few quick words before we break. For the regulars here, you'll be happy to know that we pushed back breakfast time half an hour. That's right, I finally won, which means breakfast is now at 7 a.m. Our opening keynote, however, is definitely worth it. It is at 7:30, and it's with Malcolm Jackson, the CIO, VP